and start. I think we're right there, just about. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our July 2020 Preservation Conversation, Rackensack Folklore Society, Pulaski County. I'm Patricia Blick, the Executive Director of the Quapaw Quarter Association, and I'm joined by Shelley Stormo, QQA Membership and Activities Coordinator. I would like to acknowledge the Quapaw Nation. They have generously underwritten this year's Preservation Conversation series. We would also like to thank our corporate and individual members. We would not be able to carry out our mission without extensive support, especially in these most challenging times. You can find a list of our corporate members on our website at quapaw.com. If you're not a member of the QQA and you believe in our mission, preserving Greater Little Rock's historic places, we invite you to join and support the work that we do. Please go to quapaw.com to join or to make a donation. We offer membership starting at $35 a year. We hope that you will consider joining today. I would also like to remind you that this program is worth 1 hour of AIA Continuing Education Unit credits. Please email us at qqa@quapaw.com to register your participation. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to let you know that we will be taking your questions at the end of this talk. Please type your questions in the chat area of Zoom or in the comment section of Facebook Live. I will monitor the Zoom chat comments and questions, and Shelley will monitor the Facebook Live questions and comments. On to tonight's preservation conversation. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Charlotte M. Copeland. Charlotte Copeland grew up in Orlando, Florida, where she studied violin and guitar in her teens and became part of the folk music and coffee house scene of the 1960s and 70s. She took up classical guitar in 1985, and while earning the master's degree in library science in 1992 at the University of Southern Mississippi, she was invited to join the USM Guitar Orchestra. This experience provided a broader understanding of how songs and ballads of oral tradition have influenced composers of classical and other musical genres. Charlotte joined the library faculty at the University of Arkansas, Monticello in 1992, where she was asked to organize the university archives in her capacity as a reference research librarian. From new music-minded colleagues, she learned about Rackensack and began to attend the monthly Songfest meetings in Little Rock. After several years as a member, now retired from UAM, she was invited to join the board as historian. She is also co-editor of the Rackensack newsletter. Please join me in welcoming Charlotte.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Charlotte, I hate to interrupt, but someone has themselves off mute. I need everybody to please mute themselves so Charlotte can continue. Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't have to mute myself, do I?
No.
No, I'm just joking. Okay, here we go again. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight, to talk with you about our Rackensack Folklore Society, and to share with you some of our traditional old-time music. We always begin our programs with a hoedown, so let's start with one tonight. We had planned to present live music, but the virus intervened, so we're going virtual. Here is Soldier's Joy, followed by My Own House Waltz, along with some pictures of our own Rackensack players.
I'm sorry about that. We think that I was muted, so I didn't know if people could hear the sound.
Well, I didn't, but we'll be
Okay,
showing.
we're gonna start it over.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good. Well, tonight I'll be talking about several subjects. Our mission, defining Rackensack and old-time music, our beginnings, the musical instruments we play, the origins of our songs and tunes, and our players. The mission of the Rackensack Folklore Society harmonizes with that of the Quapaw Quarter Association. Yours to preserve Greater Little Rock's historic places, ours to preserve traditional folk music through performance on acoustic instruments. We are a nonprofit organization and we function under a board of directors and an established set of bylaws. We strive to accomplish our mission in several ways. We hold free monthly musical gatherings. The public is invited. We currently have about 150 members, and of that number, about 50 are performing members. Throughout the year, we also perform at festivals, civic functions, private parties, retirement homes, and for many charitable organizations. We play every year in Mountain View up in the Stone County Ozarks for the Arkansas Folk Festival, and also the Jimmy Driftwood Tribute at the Jimmy Driftwood Barn. Over the years, we have played at the Governor's Mansion several times, as well as the state capitol. The name Rackensack is so unusual, and many ask about its origin. So let's spend just a minute on that. According to Oxford Dictionaries Online, it refers to, quote, a nickname for the state of Arkansas achieved by a humorous twist of letters to produce an internal rhyme. Arkansas, Rackensack. I have found historical references to Rackensack going back to the 1840s, shortly after Arkansas achieved statehood. There was an Arkansas fighting group in the Mexican War of 1846 to 1848 who called themselves Rackensackers and carried the famous Bowie knife as well as a banner that read, "Rackensack is in the field." Also in 1847, a Cincinnati firm published two musical works together on the same page. One was the now famous Arkansas Traveler, and the other was Rackensack Waltz with a variant spelling, but reinforcing the early and close association of Arkansas and Rackensack. One of the most interesting early usages occurred in the November 9, 1850 issue of Household Words, a weekly magazine published in London and edited by Charles Dickens. Yes, that Charles Dickens. In an unsigned story entitled "Sloped for Texas," we read, quote, "It is the boast of the young bloods of the state of Rackensack in Arkansas that they are born with skins like alligators and with strength like bears. They work hard and they play hard. Gaming is the recreation most indulged in, and the gaming houses of the western part of Arkansas have branded it with an unenviable notoriety." End quote. Arkansas was one of several frontier states, including Texas, that became the objects of quite a bit of British humor. There were also Rackensack units in the Civil War and in the Spanish-American War. We haven't found references for the two World Wars or the Korean and Vietnam Wars. More recently, the name was used during the Iraq War as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2008 with the motto, I'm quoting here, "Rackensackers lead the way to hell and back." Well, what is meant by traditional music or folk music? The key to understanding the music we seek to preserve is in the word traditional, that is, the passing down from generation to generation certain elements of a culture. In our folk music, some call it old-time music, and now we also hear roots music and as well as Americana. It's the songs and tunes extending back to such origins as the British Isles, much of Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean islands. Let's hear how a Scottish composer and musicologist, the late David Johnson, defined folk music as a living tradition in Darwinian evolutionary terms in his classic 1972 book, Music and Society in Lowland Scotland in the 18th Century. Here's a quote. "Folk music is the product of a musical tradition that has been evolved through the process of oral transmission. The factors that shape the tradition are: 1, continuity, which links the present with the past; 2, variation, which springs from the creative individual or the group; and 3, selection by the community, which determines the form in which the music survives." End quote. In rural, or we might even say rustic communities, uninfluenced by classical music or art songs, we can understand how tunes and songs kept alive by repetition through generations would not only survive, but flourish, especially when the society remained stable. And just as today, in our own experiences as ballad singers, we observe that the audience loves to hear the joyful songs, the work songs, and the hymns and gospel music, they also love to hear the songs that evoke empathy through tales of heartbreak and troubles of all kinds. The tunes and songs were about the lives of ordinary people. Folk songs are indeed the voice of the people. The Rackensack Folklore Society was formed in Mountain View in February 1963 when a group of very concerned citizens met in the medical office of Dr. Lloyd Hollister to discuss the lack of jobs in Stone County. Attending was state representative and local businessman Eddie Walker, whose concern was especially the lack of basic community services in the county, such as a sound water system, improved roads, and better fire protection. Mr. Walker, a fiddle player and one of several other folk musicians who played weekly in Dr. Hollister's office, had invited John Oppitz of the Economic Development Commission to attend. Mr. Oppitz was present at this preliminary meeting, and after some discussion, he made an unusual suggestion. that a large number of people who met regularly to play traditional Ozark music would need a meeting place, and that such a building could be the impetus for the founding of a folk culture center, which might be the stimulus for persuading the proper authority to fund at least an improved water system. Just 2 weeks later, another meeting took place to form a folklore society. Dr. Hollister was elected president. A former high school teacher, James Corbett Morris, who had become a nationally known singer-songwriter, better known as Jimmy Driftwood, was vice president. Jimmy suggested Rackensack Folklore Society as an appropriate name for the newly formed group and recommended a folk festival as an event that could bring attention to Mountain View by featuring the songs and tunes of Ozark players. Across the country, in the 1950s and 60s, a folk music revival was occurring, and several other states had already established their own festivals. He also suggested a trade show of the arts and crafts that had been a part of the local culture for many generations and volunteered to organize and host the first festival, which was to be in April 1963, just 2 months away. Jimmy had just left the Grand Ole Opry to return, as he put it, back to the Rackensack that is at home in north central Arkansas. He had already composed a number of hit songs, including The 8th of January, better known as the Battle of New Orleans, which won a Grammy Award. Others included North to Alaska, Wilderness Road, and Tennessee Stud. Closer to here, there was one called The Maid of Argenta, referring to the city now known as North Little Rock. Here he's playing an unusually shaped guitar that was made by one of his relatives out of leftover wood from the headboard of a bed. Dozens of families and friends throughout Stone County came forward to join the newly organized Rackensack Folklore Society and to participate in the first annual Arkansas Folk Festival. It was a grand success, both artistically and financially, and indeed, eventually it did lead to grants for a new water system and improved roads. Within just a few years, Mountain View became known as the folk music capital of the world. In 1973, just 10 years later, the Ozark Folk Center was opened with an auditorium that could seat over 1,000 people. Our chapter of Rackensack, that is the Pulaski County chapter, was also founded in 1963, just 4 months after the Mountain View beginning chapter. The leader here was a good friend of Driftwood's, George Fisher, who would later become a renowned political cartoonist for the Arkansas Gazette. George owned property adjacent to Jimmy's place in the Timbo community of Stone County. Here are a couple of photos of George in his dual roles as a cartoonist in Little Rock and as a folk singer and guitarist up in Stone County back in the 60s. He's the one in the center with the guitar. He totally agreed with Jimmy on the importance of preserving the heritage of Ozark old-time music. On the right, with a variation on the washtub bass, is Frank Johnson, one of the founding members. His son Jeff now plays the musical saw at our meetings. And I'm told that the man in the tree is former circuit judge David Bogard. Here's George and Jimmy and another founding member, Ken Blessing, on the fiddle. We'll see Ken later on with his daughter Denise, another one of our fine fiddlers. In 1963, our Pulaski County chapter settled with the also recently formed Arkansas Arts Center as a meeting location and met there on the first Monday of every month for 56 years until the Art Center closed for massive renovations in 2019. We then met at historic Curran Hall in Little Rock until it was shut down by the pandemic this past March. Since then, we've gone virtual. You can find Rackensack on Facebook and YouTube. We'll give you the internet addresses later. George Fisher also created bulletins in advance of the monthly meetings, usually featuring his cartoons of seasonal themes, such as this January one showing the New Year's baby with a fiddle and bow, and a July bulletin with marching musicians playing an auto harp, a washtub bass, and a harmonica. Here are two more, one for October showing a Halloween party with another washtub bass and also banjos and guitars, and one for November with a turkey tapping time and playing a fiddle, perhaps Turkey in the Straw. The musical instruments we play are mostly stringed, the fiddle and also the guitar, mandolin, banjo, auto harp, mountain dulcimer, the hammered dulcimer, which is very different from a mountain dulcimer, and the bass fiddle. We also have the harmonica, accordion, and various flutes. There are also a few unusual instruments, such as the musical saw and the dancing doll. We'll see them shortly. Also, the mouth harp, washtub bass, spoons, and bones. And we should remember that the unaccompanied human voice was an important part of the musical gatherings when the old ballads would be sung and listened to and thus memorized from one generation to the next. Were musical instruments brought to this country by the early settlers? The answer is yes. Fifes and flutes, French horns and trumpets that did not have valves, recorders, violins, various kinds of guitars, zithers and hammered dulcimers. Some of these were rather difficult to reproduce without proper tools once the originals wore out. However, the resourceful pioneers were capable of constructing sound boxes and attaching strings to them, and the extant instruments testify to the importance of music in everyday life. The violin was the dominant instrument used at front porch gatherings of families and neighbors. But how about the fiddle? How does it figure into the early musical scene? The fact is, these instruments are one and the same. There is no difference, but what actually evolved were the two words or names for the same instrument. The different names, violin and fiddle, came about probably because the two words were derived from the same Latin root, but changed as they went through different later languages. Fides was the Latin name for any kind of string, and fidicula was a diminutive for fides. In Old German, the stringed instrument's name was fidel. In Spain, the word became vihuela and then viola. In Old French, it was vielle, and in Anglo-Saxon, vithele. This is a rather simple explanation for what is a lengthy etymology of these two terms. Speaking of fiddles, we've had fiddlers from one family in Rackensack from 1963 to the present. That's 57 years. Here's Denise Blessing Hurd with her father, the late Ken Blessing. Here's a very different bowed instrument, the musical saw, played by another second-generation Rackensacker, Jeff Johnson. He uses a fiddle bow on the saw's straight edge and changes the pitch by bending the saw, more or less. The lovely sound is unusual, like that of some electronic instruments. Another unusual one is the dancing doll, a carved human figure hinged together and made to dance or keep percussive rhythm by tapping it on a wooden paddle. Here it's teamed up with a mountain dulcimer. The mountain dulcimer has a unique history. It is thought to be a truly American instrument. Some historians trace its origin within this country to the hills of Western Virginia, where it came into use in the early 1800s. A relatively easy instrument to make, with 3 or more strings stretched over a sound box that also holds a long fretboard, it has evolved into a graceful instrument that can be played just by holding it on the lap and strumming, and it has a sweet tone. The name dulcimer derives from the Latin dulce, which means sweet. With its soft and ethereal tone, the mountain dulcimer soared in popularity during the nationwide folk music revival of the 1950s and 60s, and especially after Gene Ritchie introduced it at a New York City coffee house in the early 1950s. In Mountain View, the McSpadden Dulcimer Shop has become famous worldwide as a maker and seller of fine mountain dulcimers. We have an award-winning mountain dulcimer player and instructor in Reverend Jim Munns. Another somewhat unusual stringed instrument is the auto harp. It was invented in Germany around 1880, but soon caught on in Pennsylvania and spread southward. Here are some more of our players. Gene Soji on guitar, our president Larry Cross on mandolin, Tara Ludwig and her banjo, and Dennis Cook on the hidden harmonica. It's somewhere in there, one of many instruments he plays. All the musical instruments we play are acoustic, that is, played without electrical amplification attached to the instrument. That has become an understood identifier within the term old-time music and in folk music circles. Old-time is synonymous with traditional, harking back to the days and centuries before electrification, when family or neighbors' gatherings would be fairly small, and front porch music did not require a lot of volume to be heard. The biggest competition on a soft, quiet summer night would be what Jimmy Driftwood called the Ozark Symphony. That is, frogs, hoot owls, katydids, mockingbirds, and the baying of hounds chasing possums. However, we do use microphones when playing in venues larger than front porches or for audiences larger than the immediate family. Well, what about the songs and tunes themselves? Where can we look for their origins and for the variations they must have gone through over the centuries in the old world? Of course, Americans created their own songs about their lives in the new country. Cowboy songs, railroad songs, lumber and mining songs, gospel and blues, soldiers, sailors and war songs, and working on the farm songs. As you know, provenance is an important word in determining the actual source and history of any object, especially an antique, but there is obvious difficulty in determining provenance of a folk song because of its ephemeral oral performance and transmission and the reinterpretations that occur after listening and then repeating the song and passing it along. Here we must depend on dated or at least roughly datable written accounts. These include mentions in passing in early literature and also luckily preserved ephemeral printed matter. And there are scholarly collections. As early as 1765, Bishop Thomas Percy, a former chaplain to King George III, published his Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, now known as Percy's Reliques, which was a collection of historical and lyrical ballads. Sir Walter Scott read this work in his youth and was inspired to publish in 1802 his own collection of ballads entitled Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border. A more scholarly approach to collection editing and publication was achieved by Harvard professor Francis James Child with his great collection entitled The English and Scottish Popular Ballads, now known as Child Ballads. He assigned numbers to each song, and they are now sometimes referred to as, for example, Child Ballad 456, and so forth. His work was actually an anthology of traditional ballads from England and Scotland and their American variants. This early folk song treasure was published by Houghton Mifflin in New York in 5 volumes starting in 1882 and extending to 1898. These early efforts in preserving the ancient ballads and folk music lead us right up to the 20th century and our American versions. Thanks to Thomas Edison and others, recording equipment became available. We owe a tremendous debt to the early collectors who recorded on heavy and cumbersome equipment those performers who were willing to sing into their recording instruments for preservation's sake. So much would have been lost without the early efforts of Cecil J. Sharp, Carl Sandburg, and John Lomax and his son Alan Lomax, to name just a few. Sharp had founded an early 20th century folk song revival in England and collected thousands of songs there. He later came to the United States and collected and recorded folk music in the Appalachians, including eastern Kentucky. The famous poet Carl Sandburg also collected folk songs. He published a volume called The American Song Bag in 1927. It's been reprinted several times. His guitar has an interesting bell-shaped body, doesn't it? The Lomaxes traveled widely with recording equipment, including trips down south to record lots of African American blues and gospel music. Arkansas has had its own recognized collectors, notably Vance Randolph and his wife Mary Parler, who documented and recorded folk songs in the Ozarks of northwestern Arkansas and southern Missouri. Note the tools of the 1950s trade in her office: the portable typewriter, the tape recorder, and the ashtray. Their materials are archived at the U of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Also, John Quincy Wolfe Jr., during his long teaching career in Memphis, used his summers from 1952 to 1970 to record and document folk music in the Ozark Hills within a 50-mile radius of Batesville. When he died in 1972, his wife, Bess Millen Wolfe, donated his entire collection of musical tapes to the Lyon College Regional Studies Center, where a very fine archive has been established. This online listening archive provides not only the words, but also audio recordings of the named singers and is available to everyone. At the very first Arkansas Folk Festival in Mountain View in 1963, many examples of the old world ballads and tunes and more recent American ones were heard. The players and singers were families and friends from all around Stone County, well known for their fine ability to play and sing the old songs that had been passed down in their families. No music stands were needed to provide the lyrics, no amplification for their acoustic instruments, just the microphone in the old high school where the festival was held that first year. And remarkably, their performances did not vanish into the thin mountain air, but were recorded by John Quincy Wolfe Jr. More recently, his recordings were remastered and transferred to a CD, which is available from the May B. Simpson Library at Lyon College in Batesville. The excellent liner notes are by Doctors Brooks Blevins and W.K. McNeil, both prominent folklorists of the Appalachians and especially the Ozarks. Fast forward 57 years, and we may ask the question, who are our players now? We have a great representation of talented people in our group. Several of our musicians are indeed second and third generation Rackensack players. Some had early formal musical training, and some have learned to play from friends in the old tradition of shared talent. We have among our players attorneys, church music directors, farmers, teachers, architects, auto mechanics, physicians, realtors, professional writers, and lab technicians, to name just a few. Here are some of us in a smaller venue, historic Curran Hall, where we played for several meetings in 2019 and early this year until the virus closed it down. There's another unusual instrument among this group. Here, Marky's paired string double-aught tenor guitar was specially made for her. But no matter what instruments we play or what the story or background is for each of our players, we have a unifying love for old-time music and a mutual desire to preserve it and keep it alive for new generations. To hear and see more Rackensack music and players and to access the Lyon College Folk Music Archives, go to the addresses on the screen. As we usually do, we'll close with a brief hoedown, a video with some pictures from some recent performances featuring the old favorite Ragtime Annie, followed by I'll Fly Away, sung a cappella with the Curran Hall audience participating. After that, I'd be happy to hear your questions and comments. Thank you very much. Mhm.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That was lovely, lovely presentation. And at this point, we are going to open up the floor for some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm noticing we had some questions early on. We had a little technical difficulty with the sound because we had my I was on mute. So once we figured that out, we got it redone. So, oh, this is lovely. I'm going to read a couple of these comments. You all may see them as well, but Keith Melton shared, I just wanted to say that I'm here representing the Arkansas Arts Center and as a fan and custodian of George Fisher cartoons, interested in gathering digital content, biographical photos regarding George and Rosemary. So I know that there are several folks part of this group who have information. So we'll connect everybody together. A lovely comment from Dave McAlpine. Great information, Charlotte. As a transplanted Northerner and now a lover of folk music, this was wonderful background information. And, you know, and I'll just add in here, obviously we're not able to meet at Curran Hall right now, but when we are able to get together again, it is an open forum. So obviously the musicians come and play the instruments and sing, but the public is also welcome to attend. And it's quite a lovely setting to hear this traditional folk music. So it is a lovely marriage, as Charlotte made the connection before with QQA and the Rackensack. Keith Melton also is a member of the Irish Cultural Society of Arkansas, interested in any material specific to the Irish in Arkansas. So we'll have to tap our scholars to make those connections as well. Okay, and Marky asked, please provide websites and or YouTube addresses to see performances. And so this presentation will be online on our YouTube page as well as our Facebook page. So those links that Charlotte shared in her presentation will be available in perpetuity. And one thing we'll just have to say, besides our glitch at the beginning with my computer being muted, the sound obviously is not that great that we presented tonight. So when you have an opportunity to actually listen to the music with headphones, we have discovered that that is the best way to hear the music if you can't hear it live. So we would recommend this as well. And Edward Howington simply said, that was great, Charlotte. I think you should add that Rackensack welcomes talent and training as performing is key to the music. So yes, and I think that you mentioned that as well. If you want to address that folks, it is almost not an apprenticeship exactly, but people can gain experience playing.
Oh, yes, we're always welcoming new players, and we enjoy having everyone participate. You don't have to, be experienced with your instrument. It's good experience to come before an audience. You won't find a more friendly audience than a Rackensack audience. So, yes, please come when you can.
Shelley, did you have any questions on yours? I did not have any questions, just mostly comments and recommendations. So if you have any questions from Facebook, we could share those.
I do not have any questions from Facebook, but I would like to share a comment. Carol Hodges said that she thought this was a great history and summary and that it catches the flavor of the society very well.
Oh, well, thank you. Love to see Carol again.
So let me see if we have anything else. I think we have anything else coming in. So I'll go back to my screen share and just kind of have our, Charlotte, did you want to add anything else, or did anybody want to add anything? Shelley can unmute you if you have a comment or a suggestion as well.
I don't have anything to add except that I recognize some of the names, and it's just wonderful to see everyone that we can see, and I would certainly love to get together with a Zoom or however we can to share our music together before too long. I'm sure we can do it somehow, or you all can do it and I'll participate. But it was just such a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Patricia and Shelley, and for helping us set this up.
Yes. All right, I'm going to just
we do actually have one question that just popped up. Charlotte, do you know if Dickens ever visited Arkansas?
Charles Dickens in Arkansas. I don't know that he did, but it's possible. Does someone else know the answer to that? Well, I'm going to find out.
No, I asked the question, Charlotte, but it was because you quoted him. He had made
Yes.
some quotation, and I was very interested in that, and so I just wondered if he'd actually ever visited.
No, but I'll find out and be in touch with you about it. And Lynn, I wondered if you recognized any of those sources from Scotland, the David Johnson source and some of the ballad books. Have you come
Yes, one or
across?
two, and certainly Cecil Sharp.
Yes.
No, definitely, yeah. And that was good. That was great presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again very much, Charlotte. Before everyone goes, though, I'm just going to have a few closing comments. Let's see here. All right. Again, thank you, Charlotte, for your lovely presentation. I would also like to thank her husband, Marvin, who helped her, Marvin Jeter, helped put together the PowerPoint presentation. And I'd also like to recognize Denise Blessing Hurd, who also helped us with, well, she basically is our liaison between Rackensack and QQA and organizing Rackensack here at this facility, and also assisted with some of the images in the presentation. So we want to acknowledge that as well. Before you all leave tonight, I want to remind you that next month's Preservation Conversation will be a virtual program again. And the title of the program, it will be on Thursday, August the 13th at 6 p.m. Title is Treaty of 1824 and Quapaw Removal by Dr. Joseph Key of Arkansas State University. We will have it on Zoom again, and we will also have it on Facebook Live, which you can join at any time. If you'd like to participate via Zoom, you do need to register so that we can send you the link. Thank you all again very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you next month. And Charlotte, again, thank you very much for sharing.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yes, big hands for Charlotte. Thank you all.
And thank you, Marvin. I'm so glad you brought Marvin and Denise and all of y'all, and y'all were just great.
And if anybody's still listening, lots of Rackensack music on YouTube. Just search Rackensack Folklore Society. There's tons of music there. It sounds a whole lot better than what it did tonight.
Yes.
Yes.
Put on your earphones and it sounds lovely. It's not as good as in person, but it's lovely.
Wonderful.
Lovely.
Good job, Charlotte.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.